Hello, wonderful parents, and welcome to our special episode today where we're going to be talking about unlocking your child's voice and empowering them to speak up. If you ever worried that your child is being too quiet in class, not asking questions, or feeling overlooked, you are definitely in the right place. So we've got quite a number of issues where parents come to us and they reach out to us, right? So the common issues that we face so far is they say, oh, anak saya sangat pemalu lah sebenarnya. So when the teacher asks questions, what happened is the child is so shy. So dia tak berjaya nak bagi jawapan and the cikgu dah pass on to the next student. So eventually the girl learns that, oh, okay, as long as I keep quiet, they won't bother me anymore. So this is one of the issues that parents have faced. Maybe this is your issue as well. Then the next issue that we always hear when we want to talk about empowering children, right, is that when the child actually braces themselves or actually volunteers themselves to ask a question, the teacher just shoots them down. Oh, what a stupid question. Macam tu pun ada. So parents very hurt lah. Anak saya nak belajar tapi cikgu buat macam ni. And then there's also, I think, pada pandangan saya lah, my own personal opinion, this is the worst, where the teacher says, oh, why do you want to know that? That's not in the syllabus. Tak payah tahu. So it really kills the curiosity of the child. And I think that is one of the worst things lah, bagi pandangan saya. And then, of course, yang ni paling controversial, budak tu tanya soalan sebab dia betul nak belajar, but cikgu rasa tercabar, cikgu rasa macam, ush, dia cakap, oh, kalau you pandai sangat, pergilah cari sendiri, because it mencabar ego cikgu tu lah. Cikgu tu tak tahu. Instead of just saying that saya tak tahu, jom look together, let's research this, let's find this together, they just end up saying, okay, kalau pandai sangat, kau lah cari. Dia macam tu pun ada. So these are the issues that we face. So if any of this seems familiar or you have had a variation of this sort of cases, this episode is going to be really, really useful for you. So what are we going to cover in today's episode? Let me walk you through that first. Now, before we go into the meat of the episode, right, before we start and look into what we're going to learn today, we first need to understand three things, right? What are the three things we need to understand even before we go into the episode? First, we need to understand what is the importance of asking questions in learning. What is the importance of actually empowering our children to speak up? So pada pandangan saya lah ya, kalau the parents themselves don't understand, don't know what is the importance of the child asking questions, how can this help the child, then dia akan kata tak payahlah, it's okay lah, cikgu suruh diam, you diam je lah, cikgu suruh memorize, you memorize je lah, kenapa? Why you want to make this a big deal, right? So this can be one of the issues lah. So before we get into the subject matter of today, we want to understand the importance of learning, asking questions in learning. Now, once we have done that, we want to also understand what is the difference between constructive response and dismissive behavior. Okay, ni penting ni sangat penting, especially dunia social media sekarang. So sekarang ni semua orang ambil je, you open the conversation dia terus. Biasalah cikgu zaman sekarang tak passionate, bukan macam cikgu zaman dulu. Sekarang semua nak makan gaji buta je. Normal, right? These are the things we hear. But the thing is, sometimes you need to know whether the teacher is truly being dismissive or is it the teacher is giving a constructive response. Okay, saya bagi example lah ya. This happens commonly in my class as well. So students kadang-kadang tanya soalan yang merapu-rapu. Ya, dia memang merapu lah soalan dia because they didn't focus, they didn't pay attention. So what we do when students ask these kind of questions is we tell them, okay, can you clarify your question? Why are you asking this question? What do you actually want to know? Now, this is very important because some students feel like they should just ask questions for the sake of it. So at Pass Excel, we have had students from over 23 countries, right? So when we have students, especially from South Asia, let's say Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, this region, yeah, because I think they value, culturally, they value asking questions so much in class that the students will just ask questions for the sake of asking, even though it has no context, so they can seem smart in class. So when a teacher does this, when the teacher say, clarify your question, what is the reason you're asking? So that means the teacher is actually giving constructive response. Cikgu tu nak you fikir secara mendalam. So that's what we're going to look at lah. So that not everything is the teacher's fault or the teacher's not doing a good job. So we want to know what's the difference between constructive response and dismissive behavior. And then lastly, we want to understand what is the nature of dismissive behavior, how to identify this. Now, only after we've learned these three things can we move into the meat of today's episode. So what is the meat of today's episode? The meat of today's episode is we're going to look at the psychological impact on the student, right? We're going to look at the psychological impact on the students. Then, under psychological impact, bawah payung psychological impact to or under the psychological impact umbrella, we're going to look at how does this impact the child's confidence. We're going to look at how does it impact the child's learning motivation, because this is different. And then lastly, we're going to look at emotional and social effect. How does this affect a child emotionally and socially, and what are some of the long-term consequences on the child because of the teacher's dismissive behavior. So under psychological impact, we're going to look at about 4 things here. Okay. Now, after we've done psychological impact, we are then going to move on. And of course, dah tengok impact, dah tengok kesan, kita nak tahu cara nak menangani masalah ni kan. So we are going to look at the tips, strategies, what are some of the routines you can do to actually empower and advocate your child. Okay, so when we say we want to empower your child and we want to teach them advocacy so that they can advocate for themselves, they can stand up for themselves. Now, when we say that, kita bukan nak cakap kita nak jadi macam American lah. Kita bukan nak kata, okay, let's be like woke culture, right? Now, semua pun sekarang nak jadi woke, where everybody else is wrong, you are right. This is not what we want. But what we want is for them to be able to stand up for themselves, because, you know, as parents, we cannot accompany our children everywhere, right? We cannot follow them into the workplace later. We cannot follow them into their marriage later. Hopefully lah, janganlah buat macam ni. And also, of course, we can't even follow them into schools, into classrooms, right? So how do we know our children will be able to stand up for themselves, be strong, be resilient when we are not there? How can they? That's what we mean by advocacy. So we're not teaching them like, okay, cari gaduh dengan cikgu ke, jadi biadab dengan cikgu ke. No, we want them to stand up for themselves, hopefully dengan sopan santun, budi bahasa, and without hurting anyone lah, hopefully without dismissing or making anybody else feel less of themselves. So that's what we want to cover there. So under strategies for empowerment, we want to cover a few things, which is ideas for overcoming dismissive behavior. We want to reinforce self-worth, and eventually we want to teach children how to seek support when these things happen. Right, so there are 3 things we're going to cover under strategy. And lastly, we're going to cover how do we do this here at Pass Excel, because this is a topic that is very close to heart to me and also all the teachers here. Like I told you before, we get a lot of these questions from parents who want to enroll and parents who are, surveying. They always ask us this kind of questions. So we thought like, okay, let's educate the parents. So as you can see, today's episode got lots of layers, lots of meat, and it's going to be a long episode. So let's dive right in. All right, so let's get started. So like I said just now, before we go into the meat of today's topic, we first need to know what is the importance of asking questions. Because biasalah kat Malaysia ni kan, I hear it very often, with parents. It's okay lah, cikgu kan pandai, dengar lah cakap cikgu. Jangan mencelah. Jangan mencelah. Don't keep interrupting the teacher, when the teacher says, just listen and just remember and memorize what the teacher says. It's very common. So, the problem is, I think we have a misconception about how learning happens. So, kita ingat, how learning happens is, okay, kita duduk dalam kelas, kita dengar, and then we sort of masuk ke dalam kepala, sumbat dalam kepala, and then eventually we become smart. Or I guess this is what most people think lah. The way learning happens is actually very active. So the more actively engaged you are with the material, the better the learning or the higher the quality of learning is. Now, what is the best way to engage with the material? That's right, asking questions. Now, first, before you want to even encourage your children to speak up or ask questions, I think you need to be very convinced about how does these questions actually help your children. Okay, so let's look at step 1. So the step 1 is how, when we ask question, it improves memory. Okay, so let me try to present this to you. When you ask question, what happens is there's a part of your brain called hippocampus. So this is not just for storing memory, it's also for retrieving memory. So meaning in situations, let's say I studied something and I need the information again. Usually, let's say in exam setting, kan? If this part is activated, and then retrieval becomes easier as well compared to just memorizing. So that's number one. Number two, when you ask questions, your ability to problem solve in other areas and becoming more creative is also on the rise. It increases. Why? Because people who train themselves to ask questions, they look at a problem and then they realize, this is something that not right. What can I do? How can I fix this? These questions come. But masalahnya, in our education system, since we don't encourage this actively, we discourage this, or at least don't encourage it actively, orang dengar je lah. People become very passive, right? Now, number three, social learning and emotional intelligence. Okay, this develops as well when you ask questions. How? Okay, classroom is a social setting, betul? So when you ask questions, or better yet, when a classmate asks a question, you are listening. So you are able to learn in a social environment. That's number one. When you ask questions, other people can learn. And when other people ask questions, you can learn. So this is social learning. Okay, that's okay. But the most important part, emotional intelligence. Why does this happen when you ask questions? What do you think? Can you type it out in the comment section? Okay, let me share with you. So when the classmate was asking question, you are listening, right? So when you listen, what happens? You now know, oh, okay, orang tu faham macam ni sebenarnya. Like, their perspective is so completely different than mine. I didn't even think that we can look at it this way. So what happens is it increases empathy, it increases your emotional intelligence, and most importantly, it opens you up to different perspectives, which is why learning in a group is very effective, you know. Now, number four, when you continuously ask questions, it is going to boost your confidence because you have a positive experience with asking questions and learning, and then your confidence is going to improve. If all this doesn't convince you, right? Now, let's talk about the brain chemical called dopamine. Now, you know, when do most people get dopamine hits? Okay, the natural ones is if you exercise, you go out in the sunlight and everything. But the not so natural one is when they call it cheap dopamine lah, when you scroll on social media. Now, what is this dopamine? Dopamine is an enjoyment feeling, you know, like when it hits, it's a joy feeling, right? So most people get this dopamine hits when they go shopping or they eat really good food. Now, kids get this dopamine hit, or even us get this dopamine hit when we actually ask questions, right? So when we ask questions, the happiness from discovering something new, from learning something new, makes the learning experience so enjoyable for children. Now, as parents, I think that's what we want. We want them to actually enjoy learning so that they can continuously learn for the rest of their life, right? If all this doesn't convince you, there's another important reason why they should ask questions. It's called cognitive load lah. So we want to reduce this cognitive load. What is cognitive load? Cognitive load is just a fancy way of saying that your brain is overwhelmed. So bila kita dengar, kita tak tahu nak sumbat macam mana tahu. Kita tak tahu macam mana nak atur the information in our head. So when you ask questions, you now are able to categorize. Oh, this means this means that. And we can arrange it in our head. So that is cognitive load. Now, the most important one that I think is here, two things. One, it encourages them to become more curious. Like I said, oh, why is this like this? Why is it like that? So it makes them very curious so they can continue to learn. And this continuing to learn, it creates neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is our brain's ability to continuously connect neurons, continually, form these linkages and become smarter and better and better. So that means there's no one point where our children will stop growing, at least mentally. Asking question promotes this. So I think as parents, this is a fantastic reason why we should want our children to actually want to ask questions. Now, hopefully, this has convinced you on why it is so important for children to speak up, ask questions, and learn in this manner, right? Now, since we already known this, we already know, okay, so they must ask questions lah. before we go into the subject matter, we want to know what are the ways that a teacher can dismiss a student's question, or how can a teacher buat, like, what is their dismissive behavior so that you can spot or you can teach your children to spot this. Now, the first dismissive behavior paling common lah, I just ignore. I buat-buat tak dengar. Ni especially true if anak tuan-puan jenis yang dia memang suara kecil, very shy, and then suara pun dalam kelas tak dengar. So lagi senang lah, cikgu just dismiss. Right? Then the other one is the teacher belittles. The teacher makes fun of you. Oh, alah, takkan benda ni pun tak tahu. Benda ni pun nak kena tanya ke? Boleh Google kan? This is common. You'll be surprised how many times I've heard this from parents who say, oh, this is what the teacher said. Right? Boleh Google kan? Tak payahlah dia tanya soalan macam ni. So it actually harms the student's confidence because they feel like, oh, and then I guess I should not be asking these questions then because I seem very silly. I should have just Googled it. Right? So belittling the student. The third one is impatient. Oh, sorry, you cannot ask questions until I'm done, or you wait lah until next class ke, and then the teacher say wait until the end of the class. So tapi cikgu tak ajar, lepas tu kita okay class, see you in the next class or see you next week. Dia cabut. Right. Now, this is actually a trick most teachers use. Why are they so impatient? Because you need to understand. Right now, most school management, cara dia measure a teacher's performance is based on whether the teacher finishes syllabus. So what happens is the teacher then focuses on finishing the syllabus instead of whether your child understands what is being taught. Right? So if I allow for all these questions, then I'm not going to hit my KPI lah. So I just push them lah. So the teacher is like, oh, wait, impatient. The teacher is very impatient, don't want to do. Then the next thing is lack of support. Okay, so lack of support. How to explain lack of support? Okay, lack of support macam ni. So I had a student who the teacher, she asked the teacher this question. She said, oh, I don't understand. Can you explain? Then what the teacher did was the teacher repeated what she said. The teacher just repeated, this is the definition of opportunity cost, blah, 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 blah. Repeat. Then the teacher said, no, I don't understand. Then the teacher repeat again. So then the student is a student who's able to speak up from her previous school. This was her experience. So she shared. So she told the teacher, I'm not asking you to repeat. I'm asking you to explain. If I couldn't hear you, I would have said, please repeat. And the teacher lost it. The teacher lost it because the teacher felt she's attacking her. The teacher felt she was being disrespectful. So this is lack of support. The teacher doesn't encourage or form a culture of asking questions. The last one is giving negative feedback. So every time somebody asks a question in class, what the teacher does is every time negative. Kenapa tanya soalan macam ni? Okay, nantilah, tak payahlah tanya soalan macam ni. It's okay, you know what, you don't understand this anyway, you don't even understand the basics, what's the point of asking this? So every time negative feedback. Now, these are the most obvious signs, like when your child knows the teacher is being dismissive, right? Now, there is another set of teachers or another set of behaviors in teachers which are a bit more subtle. So it becomes quite hard, right, to identify whether they are being dismissive or not. Okay, so example, cikgu ni, this is a real story. If a particular race of students ask in the class, she answers. If another or any other race of students ask in class, dia tak jawab. We call this selective responsiveness lah. I mean, in our methodology, we say the teacher is selectively responsive. But kalau tanya saya, ni daripada cakap selective responsiveness, lebih baik cakap racist lah. That's one choice. Then selective responsiveness in another way. Teacher has favorites. Teacher just answers from a certain number of students, or certain student asks, she answers. Other student asks, you don't answer. So this is all selective responsiveness, which make the child get very confused. Like, what's wrong here? Why is the teacher not answering me? Is something wrong with me? Then, of course, the most common one, sarcasm and mockery. Every time you ask question, oh, you ke? So sometimes it's just framed as humor, but or they turn every question the student asks into a joke. So eventually the student feel like, okay, you know what? Maybe I should just keep quiet. This is another behavior, right? So share that with your children. Now, the other one is the teacher gives a rushed answer. So every time the child asks a question, or it's very superficial, the answer is like what I told earlier, is just a repetition. So the student doesn't even understand what is being told. Some teachers, super pro, they don't even do rush answer. They just give body language. When the student asks, stare them down, guarded body language, which means the student cannot even muster the courage to ask, right? And the last one, which I think is really, really bad, is some teachers cultivate a culture of the class being quiet, like meaning they prefer silence. Throughout, I am talking now, you don't talk. Nobody moves, nobody even breathes, right? Because they feel like you should just listen throughout my class. Now, this is a very passive form of learning, very outdated form of learning. We are not saying that the students should talk to each other, but the students should definitely engage with the teacher. I have had teachers at Pass Excel, right? Because we do one-to-one with the teachers and get to know what's their challenges on a weekly basis. So one of the one-to-ones I remember, dia datang ke I, dia kata, oh, Mr. Yuvan, I seriously don't like this class. I tanya, kenapa? The class is so quiet. Every time I present, I tanya soalan, dia orang macam like very, very quiet. They're too obedient. So they don't even engage with the material. So these are the teachers we have here, because these teachers prefer if you continuously engage with the material, continuously ask questions, because when, as a teacher, even for me, if you ask a lot of questions, I know what is your level of understanding about the material. So then I can further guide you. Now, that is how you can see if they are being dismissive or they are giving constructive responses. Now, I have a very important question for you guys who are listening here, right? Now, have any of you noticed that these behaviors are being present in your children's teachers, or your children have come back home and complained of any of these one things, or a variation, or even a combination of all these items that I've listed here? So please comment down here so we know that what is it that you're experiencing, and probably we can help you out. Now, having said that, we're going to take a short break and then move on to the next section, which is the meat of today's episode, which is we're going to talk about what are the psychological impact on the students, right? We're going to look at the four types of impacts that I mentioned just now after a short break.
My name is Muhammad Taimur. I am 14 years old and I'm from Lahore, Pakistan, and I'm a student at Pass Excel. Of my past experiences in a conventional school, like even if you ask a single question from just a little bit outside the syllabus, like you're done. They like scold you. They scold you to death, and then you like literally, because of how ashamed you are, you literally stay quiet for the entire class. You can't make mistakes. Like they literally shout at you like, why are you making mistakes? I've taught you this. Another thing was their teaching methods, especially Mr. Yuvin's and Mr. Rashad's. Like they encouraged me to actually ask questions, make mistakes, something that I've always been scared about. But this time after joining Pass Excel, I really became more of a guy who wants to learn from his mistakes rather than just staying away from them and trying to be perfect in every answer. I got really close to the teachers. I could basically talk to them about anything. They were ready to listen to basically any of my thoughts or any of my concerns, which was really good. It made me feel like I was really at home.
Right. Okay, so we are back now. Sorry perangai cikgu, kita kena recap. So what have we learned so far? We've learned understanding the importance of asking questions. We understood what is the difference between constructive and dismissive, constructive response and dismissive behavior. And we've also learned how to identify dismissive behavior so that you can share with your children. Now, for the meat of the episode, we're going to look at psychological impact, and then we're going to move on to tips, strategies, and tricks that you can share with your children or you can utilize yourself as well. Now, let's look at psychological impact. So we're going to do this comprehensively. So we're going to look at impact on confidence, learning motivation, effect on emotional and social impacts, and then we're going to look at long-term consequences. Okay, so first of all, let's get started with impact on confidence. Okay, so the thing with confidence is this, right? So when your children are not taught how to speak up, or when they try to speak up, instead of being nurtured, they are being squashed. First thing that happens, the children immediately start to develop fear of speaking up. Okay, why is this? Yalah, every time kita cuba cakap, orang pelekehkan kita, kita jadi the joke of the class. So eventually we are labeled. So eventually the children don't speak up. So they develop real fear of speaking up. Now, this is another thing, yeah. So maybe, like you see, classroom is a social setting, right? Let's say your child is like one of these students that I know, they're actually quite brave. They actually want to ask a lot of questions. Though even though dia pelekehkan, dia macam tak kisahlah, I still want to know my answers, right? Now, what happens is, she is the only one that has these questions, because everybody else have learned the social cues. Oh, this teacher is going to do it like this. The teacher is going to make fun of me, or the teacher is going to ask me to shut up, or, you're going to do all these things, right? So all the other children start to keep quiet. Now, the child who is still brave and who still wants to learn, what's going to happen to them? That's right. They are going to develop a serious sense of self-doubt. They're going to doubt, kenapa aku je yang ada soalan? Orang lain tak ada pun. So aku je yang bodoh. Or is it, am I the only one who doesn't understand? Like, why is it that I'm not able to understand? During our discovery sessions where, before we take any students at Pass Excel, we do a thorough discovery session. And one part of the discovery session is a meeting or an interview with the teacher. So I've heard the students say this, they're very confused. They start doubting their own intelligence and their own abilities. It is really sad to see. So this is another impact on the child's confidence. Okay, now imagine if I continuously doubt myself, if I continuously think I'm not good enough, I am not smart enough, which is what's happening, right? Because I get all these cues. What's going to happen? I am going to end up with a very low self-esteem. So now, here's my question to those of you who are bosses, who are in C-suites, in corporate, right? You've gone to you've gone to a meeting, Malaysian employees, especially the younger ones, or now I assume some of even the older ones, because, our education system has been bad for some time now. When you ask question, oh, okay, what do you guys think about this? What do you think we can do? Quiet. There's no response. There's nobody who wants to speak up. Product of our education system, because eventually the child gets this idea, siapa lah aku? Who am I? Why should I even bother speaking out? Like, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough. So they eventually feel undervalued and insignificant. This is bad. So if you're a teacher listening to this, please remember that this is your call to make a difference in our education system. Yeah, as a teacher, there's so much you can do to build a better future for our country. So, and that starts by letting them ask questions in class, encouraging, building a culture where students love asking questions in class, right? Now, having said that, we also need to look at what is the impact on learning motivation when we stop students from speaking up or asking questions in class, right? The first thing, okay, let's not look at C-suite, corporate. Let's just look at our own house, okay? Let's say kita married, we're parents. Okay, katalah kita cuba satu hari ni pergi dapur nak tolong. Lepas tu, your wife says, tak payahlah, tak payah. You every time you do this, jadi semak je tempat ni. Nanti I yang kena bersihkan. Susah tau. Tak payahlah. Then you try again, second day. Kan I dah cakap, tak payah. I buat je sendiri. So, if you got level of patience, maybe you try 3-4 times. Okay lah, let's say you super patient lah, you try 10 times. What's going to happen? Every single time, your interest to help is going to go down. Tu dah kira own married couple, right? Married and it's your own wife. Now, for children, can you imagine every single time dia cakap, yalah, dipelekehkan every single time. What's going to happen is their level of engagement with that material is also going to go super down. So they're not going to participate in class. They're not going to put in effort to study more or learn, connected materials. No, they're just going to be like, okay, if you say so, no need lah. Now, why this is a problem? Because you need to understand, once they have a decreased engagement towards the subject, right? What's going to happen to their academic performance? You dah jadi tak suka subject. Kita kena faham, because students don't say, oh, I hate science. They usually say, I hate Mr. So and so. His classes are so boring. Like, I don't want to learn. Because you would see that when you have an interesting teacher, suddenly the child becomes super interested in learning the subject. So I've experienced students who, in their previous school, they did not like business studies and economics. And then when they shifted to Pass Excel, then suddenly they're like, oh, this subject very interesting. Huh? It's like relatable to real life. It teaches us about what's happening in the world and everything. So if you ever go to our testimonial page, you can see our students speaking like this. So when the teachers are good, they encourage students to ask questions, they make the class relatable. First, the engagement goes up, the engagement with the material, the engagement with the subject. They start to learn more, they start to want to open their book more often and stuff like that. And that then results in improved academic performance. Now, when we don't do that, first, the engagement goes down, right? Then what happens is they then start stopping to wanting to take up challenges. Okay, so it's like this now. When they like the subject, when they're engaging with the subject, then they suddenly feel like, I can do this, I can do this. Like, this is good. Like, I'm so good at this. And then they take up, okay, let me try a bit harder. Let me try a bit harder. But when the engagement goes down because of the teacher's attitude and because, they're not being able to speak up and ask questions, they also start avoiding challenges. They don't want to do anything that is more challenging. And unfortunately, it usually spreads to other areas of their life. All right, so we've looked at all these things that I've mentioned. We've looked at the effect on learning, right? Learning motivation, especially. Now, let's look at what is the emotional and social effects. So, one of the first things that happens when they are continuously being dismissed is that the students then start to socially withdraw. Okay, how does this work? Because they are being constantly dismissed in classroom settings, right? So whenever they are in the classroom, they are there, physically there. They are there. They are present. They're sitting down on that chair. But their mind is not there anymore. Because they don't like the teacher. They don't like the teacher. They don't like the environment. They check out. So they just sit there. And it doesn't help that most teachers, since they prefer the quiet classroom, they don't even notice the student has checked out. Now, kalau dia check out masa kelas je tak apa. Okay, let me tell you a story. We've experienced this. This girl was in government school. Her Malay is not very good. Now, she is Malay, but her Malay is not very good, right? Because parents speak English at home most of the time. So she prefers communicating in English. Now, in government school, the teachers start picking on her. Oh, macam Mak Saleh lah, you ni lupa, whatever that they say lah, right? I don't want to repeat that here. So because she got all that, and then friends started like also isolating her, like leaving her, pulaukan dia sebab because her Malay is not very good. Eventually, the child's social withdrawal was not just in classroom settings. Parents, so again, this we discovered during the discovery session. So when we did the discovery session, one part of it is actually psychometric assessments. So when we did the assessment, the child is actually proven to be a social butterfly, very outgoing, very friendly, jovial, and all that. Then when we do the one-to-one interview, the child's not like that at all, but we can see she has a sense of humor. She like a dry humor here and there, it's coming out, but she's very guarded. She's very quiet. So when the third part of the process is, of course, talking to the parents. So when we spoke to the parents, we see there's a misfit here. There's a mismatch, actually. There's a mismatch between what the psychometric assessment is showing and what your child is demonstrating. Then the mom came up and said, actually, this was not the case. She was actually a really outgoing child. But when she started school, because of this problem, she started feeling isolated in school. And then the problem extended to home, where she doesn't want to talk to the parents so much. She doesn't want to socialize with the cousins. So the feeling of isolation actually can extend. So because they feel disconnected, right? They feel lonely. So it starts to spread to other areas of life. This is, if you have children who are like this, you really need to pay attention to them, because what I noticed is some parents, so in her case, her mom was very attentive. The mother noticed that. But the dad, on the other hand, thought that, alah, biasalah, budak sekarang nak jadi remaja, memang ada perangai, memang macam ni, dia tak tahulah, dia moody lah, girls, you know lah, very moody. So the father dismissed that. The father didn't think that was a very serious matter. But it was so serious that she was borderline getting into depression, right? So, kita tak nak pelekehkan benda macam ni. Kita tak nak macam, we don't want to minimize the impact what the things can do to our children. So, it's very important. These are some of the emotional and social effects that your children can experience if they're not encouraged to speak up. Now, the next one, what we want to look at is, what are the long-term consequences of being dismissed and not allowed to speak up, right? So the first thing, they actually develop they have an issue with authority figures. So the girl I mentioned just now, over the period of time, she has issues with her own father, because they're dismissed so often in school with the teacher, right? The problem is, kita ingatkan cikgu tu cikgu je tau. But you must understand, when most children, they are exposed to a teacher figure as early as, 4 years old? Because we send our children to daycare, kindergarten, and whatever not, right? So in the child's mind, the teacher is somewhat like a third parent. So they have a position of authority, they have a position of love. So for the children who are raised very well, yeah, they see teachers as a position of love, position of care, a caregiver, and all that. So can you imagine, every day you're getting dismissed by someone who you see as your caregiver or an authority figure? Eventually what happens is, you develop a distrust for anybody who is an authority figure. And then it starts affecting not just their relationship with their future teachers, but also mentors, employers, in this girl's case, even her own father. Right? So this is actually the long-term consequences of being constantly dismissed. Now, this is something not what we wish for our children, right? And then it impacts all their future learning. Okay, why does this impact their future learning? So you would have noticed, very simple example, I think, would be this one student that I had, right? So what happens is, I tell you what happened. Okay, I tell you how I actually managed to see what is the problem here. So this girl came to us somewhere when she was in year 9. Her mom switched schools because the mother said, I don't think so, she's doing very well in the current school. I would like something more personalized, something more focused on her. So we had all the sessions, and then we brought the girl in, right? So we already knew, even in our initial assessment, we know her mathematics is quite weak. So when I was teaching her maths, so of course year 9, right? So we started with algebra. The mom told, and also in our assessments, we know her algebra is quite weak. So we did the algebra. When we started algebra classes, I thought algebra was weak. Okay, then when we were doing the question, I noticed she cannot make X the subject matter. So for parents who have forgotten algebra, let me just explain here. So that means you move things around and then you make X the subject matter, right? So for that, you need to know the operations in maths. Now, operations math is something you learn much earlier. So I thought, okay, so operations is the problem. So I started focusing on the operations. Then when I was teaching her operations, I noticed she got problem with division, fractions, because in maths, like things, especially in algebra, things will move up and down and whatever not, right? She got problem with division, fractions. So then I had to move down. So when we are moving division, fractions, that means we are going back to primary school. Now we are going, I'm drilling down to find out the problem. So we are already somewhere, I remember I'm going through with her with something like year 6, year 5 syllabus maths. But she's in year 9. Huh? Then when I'm teaching this division, I realized she has multiplication table problem. Now, when we hit the multiplication table problem, I know there's a serious issue, because from our initial conversation with the mother and her and whatever not, this girl comes from an Islamic school and she has memorized the entire Quran. So to me, it doesn't make sense. You have memorized the entire Quran, impossible that you cannot remember multiplication table, right? So then I called the mom. So when I called the mom, then I spoke to the mom. I said, Kipuan, this is the issue. I explained how I got here. And then the mom said, yeah, thank you so much for reaching out. I really appreciate how your school is functioning, like, the level of communication and how closely you guys are working with us. I really appreciate the collaborative effort lah. Then she said, yeah, she's always had a problem with maths. It started early on and everything. So I said, what actually happened? So I probe. Eventually, the mother said, this was in another Islamic school, apparently, when she was in her primary years. That's why they switched. The teacher told the girl that maths is not important for you. You're a girl. Maths is nothing. You don't need to know this. You don't need to be good at this. Anyway, you're already not good at it. You don't have to focus on it. See, I told you earlier, right? The kids view teachers as position of love, a position of care. So from someone who you see as a caregiver telling you this, the child chose to believe it. And for us to undo this, wow, it really took a lot of effort. We had to change the child's belief system at the core to make sure that it does not impact any future learning. So this is very true, yeah, because we've also had students where from in the previous school, the child was told they were dumb, like, oh, they really cannot perform and whatever not. And then when they come here, we work on their mindset, we work on their belief system, then suddenly the boy is getting A star. So if you want to know about these students, please check out our testimonial videos on YouTube. You will see them, what are the differences that they've experienced here, yeah? So this is the impact on future learning, right? Now, lastly, I want to touch on a very important subject here. If you look at these two students, right, one that he was told he is dumb, and the other girl who was told mathematics is not important. What this did to them is it changed their self-perception. It changed how they viewed themselves as a person. So for the longest time, because the boy, he is very close to me, and now he's in the UK already, in continuing his tertiary education, right? For the longest time, he believed the teacher is true, the teacher knows better. Because, of course, as a student, you will feel that, right? Because the teacher sees more students than you, the teacher is older than you, the teacher is the subject matter expert. You're just learning the subject for the first time. So this boy really believed the teacher that he is dumb. And can you imagine if he didn't come here, it would have left him thinking that this is all that he can reach up to. This is the limit of his aspiration, right? He cannot even think that he can go beyond this. So what happens is this dismissiveness behavior eventually makes students dream lesser, think themselves smaller, and reduces their willingness to pursue things. Right? And this is very dangerous. So because of that, we want to make sure that this doesn't happen to our children. How do we do that? Next, we're going to explore the strategies for empowerment and advocacy. That's what we're going to look at next, right after this break.
My name is Young Chai, and I'm 17 years old this year, and I'm a student from Pasig South. I definitely feel that I'm more motivated to do well in my studies, and I'm also a much more confident person now in terms of like academically and also in person. And I definitely noticed that I have the courage to take up like responsibilities, challenge, and opportunities.
All right, so we are now back, and this is the most interesting part, bahagian paling menarik lah, because we are going to actually finally be able to talk about the strategies for empowerment and advocacy. So we are going to talk what are the tips and tricks. Now, why is this important? Because we're going to learn at this part, how can we make our children persist no matter how much the teacher ridicules them ke, shuts them down ke, pelekehkan dia ke, our children can persist, be persistent and actually get their answers. Now, we're going to break this down to a couple of sections. So the first section will be ideas for overcoming this dismissiveness. Then we're going to look at how we can reinforce the self-worth and curiosity. Because remember, I was telling you before, it really does impact them. And I've seen so many times in my students before. And then the last part is we're going to see how they can seek support when necessary. So that's 3 parts. Let's get started. Okay, the first part, right? This one, orang yang buat insurance, orang yang buat sales, orang yang, doing all this network marketing, you guys must be very familiar lah. We call that role playing. We call it role playing. So what do we do? Dekat rumah, kita practice. So, kita kata, okay, abang, kalau cikgu cakap macam ni, you cakap apa? Kalau cikgu kata, oh, diamlah, jangan cakap lah, whatever. How are you going to react to that? So, we practice scenarios at home so that children can get used to different kind of scenarios that they will be in, so that when they face it, they tak terkejut beruk lah. They tak macam like, oh my God, what is this? Like, so they are used to this already. And then because of the practice, they can do it in real time. Remember? So we don't want to shock our children. So that's what role playing does. Then the next thing is, okay, let's say lah, kita ada anak yang memang kita ajak dia role play pun dia kata tak nak, nangis lah, tak nak, don't want to engage lah, macam-macam. So what we can do, we can try a softer approach. For this, what we can do is we can encourage them to write down the question. Okay, you write down your question and then pass to the teacher when the teacher is done teaching or when the teacher is sitting down. So we go and pass the question to the teacher. So this one, even though they're not comfortable asking the questions out loud because they might be like, introvert or really quiet and all that, at least they have an alternative solution. And the best part about writing this question down is in case the teacher still doesn't answer and you are not thinking about switching schools because finance is a limitation, or maybe, whatever else lah, that is a limitation. So at least when they come back home, they can give the question to you and you can teach them how do they find these answers, either via their books or via online, or via going to, adults like yourself, or going to reputable websites lah. So this, what it will do is, it also helps them develop some sort of independence and develop some resilience, because, okay, they know that if I cannot get it from this source, I still can find in other sources. Now, the part that is important, I have to emphasize this because I get this a lot during talking to parents. I understand as parents, you're very busy, right? I mean, I completely empathize because kadang-kadang dah habis kerja, kita penat. So macam just need half an hour to rest ke, like we just want to space out. Tapi masa tu lah anak nak tanya soalan. Right? So how do we deal with this? Yang kita tak patut buat. Jangan kata, oh, ini kepada especially to the fathers lah. Jangan kata, pergilah tanya mak. Your mother knows better. Don't push the children away because it really does impact them. Okay, a better way to do this is you cakap, you communicate lah. I'm really overwhelmed. I'm really stressed out, or I'm really tapped out today. Can you give me an hour or two? I'm just going to take a short nap. And then maybe when I wake up, kita boleh buat soalan ni together. So that's better. Okay, so kita try to make sure at least we are there for them if the teachers are not there. Now, this is provided that you're not switching schools, right? Of course, if you switch to a better school, then this problem is taken care of. The last part, you want to build a supportive network, or you want to encourage your children to build a support network. So how does this work? It's either you try to arrange for friends, your friends' children, ataupun your children look out and form a study group so they can learn from their peers. Okay, learning from peers, we talked about earlier, we touched about it a little bit, we talked about social learning. So even though at Past Excel, the classes are super engaging because how we do it is, it's the whole class is done via question and answer session. So it's very two-way, super engaging. Even for classes like this, we still have a slot called P2P, which means peer-to-peer. Every week they learn with their peers, because you know lah, kids these days, right? If you want to get them to form a study group on their own, maybe tak jadi lah. So we form it for them, and then the teacher monitors like how they do it. So the teacher doesn't teach during these sessions, they are learning from each other. So we have a student mentor, and then we have a buddy, right? This buddy system is there. Why do we even do this? Because it's super effective. Because learning from your friend it's a different perspective from learning from a teacher, right? And it works both ways. So if your child is the smarter one, don't think it is damaging to them or a waste of time. Because what happens when your child who is smarter teaches a weaker child, they have to change the way they teach in different ways until the student understands, right? Until their friend understands. So they develop different perspectives. And when you teach it again and again, it becomes strengthened in your own mind. So sebab tu orang dulu kata, jangan kedekut ilmu lah, right? So that's exactly why we do it as well. Now, the second one that we want to talk about today is about reinforcing self-worth and curiosity. Okay, cikgu kat sekolah dah buat macam ni kan. So at home, what we want to do is we want to remind our children that their worth, their intelligence is not defined by that teacher's inability to appreciate their question. We want to make sure that our child understand that curiosity is strength. Because in today's world where things are changing so fast, AI is definitely going to replace most jobs. That curiosity, that ability to learn, that wanting to learn is what's going to put them at the top tier. So you remind them that their curiosity is worth a lot, that you can do that by celebrating that at home, right? So how can you celebrate at home? How can you do that? So every time a child asks a question, dramatic lah sikit. Wow, that's a really good question. I wonder how you got that question. Why did you think about that? That's a really good question. Let's find an answer for that, right? You show enthusiasm, you show interest for the things that they want to learn about. Okay, this is public service announcement lah, yeah? Okay, if you don't develop enthusiasm for what they like or what is in common, right, between you, or you don't try to find common ground, you will be surprised, that then after they turn 20, 25, they don't want to talk to you anymore. You don't have any common ground. Lagi teruk dah jadi 30, 35, dia tengok you, dia rasa macam dia tengok stranger. And I see this a lot in parents, right? So it's very important that we, early on itself, we develop this common ground. How can we do that? Celebrate their successes. Be interested in things that they're interested in. At least find common ground lah, right? Okay, the last part, kita nak buat seeking support when necessary. So, we want to teach our children that if you cannot find support from your teacher, and then seek it elsewhere. And where is that place? Kita kena specify so that they don't seek it from the wrong sources, right? So we say counselors, principals, or maybe you have other teachers. If they're constantly feeling dismissed, they can seek help from all these other adults. So we want to teach our children that so that they are not lost when it happens to them. All right? Now, having said all this, I want to bring all this together on how do we integrate this at Past Excel. So first thing, I already mentioned to you that our classes are super engaging, it's 2 ways and everything, right? How do we just run classes based on question and answers? Now, must be curious, right? Impossible. Cikgu selalunya mengajar, kan? But I personally think, like, when teachers do that, it's such a waste of time because everything that, if you're going to be a parent, might as well the child watches a YouTube video, right? And the child will be more interested, or TikTok reels or whatever. The child's not interested. You cannot beat what some of the best teachers are teaching on YouTube. So how do we do it here at Past Excel? It's very different. Before you come in, you will watch something we call a pre-class material. It'll be a very short video, 5 minutes, whatever. So what this does is it creates mental hook in the child. So like it's already something is there. Even though it's blurred, it's not clear, you just watch a very short video, at least you know what it is. You've been introduced to the material. Then after you do that, they are then required to play a game. So when you're playing the game, unknown to that child, the teacher knows which answer you're clicking. It's a quiz, game, kind of a thing, So the teacher knows, okay, these are your answers the first time round. And after you're done, the system always prompts the child, okay, do you want to try again? Because they have a leaderboard, right? So they know where are they scoring against their classmates. So they can play again. We build resilience. We build them to keep trying, to continuously improve. So the teacher also knows how many times did a child try. So that tells me how much effort you have. And I also know at every single time which are the questions you got wrong. And for the whole class, I know where certain things most students don't understand. Certain things only your child doesn't understand. I already know before the student even steps into the class. So as a teacher, my job once they are in the class is to fix their understanding. So I ask them, okay, why did you answer this question like this? What did you think about this? What did you think about that? Why is the reason why you think about this? So eventually by active questioning, we encourage them to speak up, we build their confidence, and like I said, the questions make their memory stronger, their ability to retrieve stronger, and they eventually fall in love with learning. Now, not only that, remember I was telling you they play the game. When they click the wrong answer, they immediately told this is the wrong answer. So they don't have to wait for the teacher to mark and come back to them and everything. That's at least the pre-class assessment. And then when we do the homework and all that, the teacher marks and they get personalized homework based on their strengths and weaknesses, and also they get personalized feedback on what is it that they need to improve. So all this actually brings you to a very personalized education. Okay, kita tengok kalau kita pergi sekolah lain, kita pergi sekolah traditional, even a physical school, of course, yes, physical schools, they would have like debate clubs, they would have public speaking competition, they might have a lot of things, right? But who goes for all this competition? Not every single student, all right? Because they will pick the best, and then the best gets to go and participate in these activities. So kalau anak tuan puan jenis yang pemalu ke, jenis yang memang tak nak participate ke, they get left out despite you paying premium fees for international school, right? Right here at Pass Excel, what happens is every single student goes for these things. Every single student is required to participate because no matter what, exposure to this builds your confidence, right? So, okay, tak apa, you introvert, you tak nak try, it's okay, you just give it a try. No matter how bad you are, at least you know what it is. So we personalize it, we differentiate the levels, so we make sure they are given the correct challenges so they can develop themselves. And most importantly, you would have noticed that I've been talking about the discovery session and the strategy call and how many sections there are in the discovery session. You can definitely check it out on our website. But what I want to emphasize here is because we understand the student and the parents' needs so well, and then we pass it over, all this this information is, the teachers are briefed, yeah. So the teacher knows each student's dreams, aspirations, fears, strengths, weaknesses. So when the teacher is in class, the teacher is able to nurture the student's self-esteem, the motivation, and they know what are the tips to use, what are the strategies to use to psychologically motivate the student as well, and to, to make sure their emotional needs are met. So through all this, we managed to build a very resilient community of students. So, if you want to check us out, please go ahead, go to YouTube. You can see what other parents have said about us and whatever not, right? Now, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Now, what I have to leave you with, I hope this has been extremely valuable for you. We've tried to do a lot of research so that we bring something that is useful for you. I really would love that if you could leave us with any questions, either regarding how to implement the systems and strategies, if you have other problems, whatever it is, leave it in the comment section below, share it with whoever who might need to hear this. And we hope to see you really soon in the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.